Bruce.
Your Worship, I have a few questions, and then if it would be in order, I have a motion. The questions are brief. First of all, regarding the contingency reserve fund, currently budgeted at $4 million. The snow in January, will that cost come out of the contingency reserve?
Yes, it will.
All right. Now, should council in its wisdom decide that all of the yet unallocated, unapproved initiatives that total $3.8 million, should council in its wisdom approve all of those initiatives, the 04 cost would be $3.8 million?
3.8, that's correct.
All right, that even takes into consideration the fact that, of course, those initiatives would not start until partway through the year. The $3.8 million is not the annualized cost, but the, for lack of a better term, the this year cost.
Yeah, the prorated cost.
Thank you very much. Now, briefly, in terms of the impact on the average homeowner, and by the way, you did an excellent job, very good report. One of your slides referred to the impact on the average home, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, at 2.68%, the tax increase would be approximately, was it $39?
Yes.
All right, now I'm going to test, I'm not sure whether it's your arithmetic or mine, or perhaps both of ours, and I don't need an exact answer, but very, very roughly speaking, if we were to increase taxes not by 2.68%, but by another 25 basis points, by another 1/4%, very roughly speaking, then taxes to that average home would go up not by $39, but by approximately another what? Another $3?
Sounds
3.6.
$3.60. All right, so a little bit less than, not quite a penny a day. Your Worship, I'm ready to move a motion. Would that be in order? All right, I'll wait till after Councillor Louis. Thank you.
Your Worship, are we not deferring this until committee? Thank you, Your Worship. Just to be clear, the rate of inflation that we're basing these calculations on is 2.1%. And the way that you've derived the 2.1% rate of inflation has not been any change from previous years on the way that council, or the city, has calculated that rate of inflation.
That is correct. We've used the average annual change.
So when Councillor Sullivan speaks of January rate, then Councillor Sullivan is incorrect. We should not be using the 1.3, but rather using the 2.1% rate.
That would be a more accurate figure to use.
Okay. The percentage increase, tax increase last year was 4.67, and then there was a subsequent adjustment made to that for the homeowners because there was a transfer of 0.5% to from commercial to residential. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And that resulted in a just over 6% tax increase for the residential homeowners because about 1.36, I believe, because it came to 6.2, sorry, percent, 1.3 of percentage was transferred between the classes, and or thereabouts.
Okay.
If Councillor, would it be correct to say that if Councillor Sullivan's motion, which was to transfer a complete 1%, the tax increase to the homeowners, which Councillor Sullivan wanted and voted for, tax increase would have been somewhere around 7.5% for the homeowners.
That sounds right.
So in fact, Council did not want to increase the homeowners' taxes by 7.5% last year, as Councillor Sullivan wanted, but rather kept it at a modest rate of 6.02, while trying to find the appropriate balance between our residential property taxpayers and the commercial taxpayers. So when Councillor Sullivan talks about keeping things at the rate of inflation, Councillor Sullivan perhaps is disingenuous with his calculations and perhaps needs to... So, back to some questions.
Thank you.
I did have a question regarding the capital from revenue. We were recently reclassified by one of our bond ratings agencies, and one of the highlights of that was that not enough monies were coming from capital from revenue. And I know that we deferred $2 million last year, and we're now on the uptake, trying to bring back some of that in this year and subsequent budget year next year for another further $1 million. What other adjustments have we envisioned for that, or is it necessary to make that adjustment in order to firm up our credit rating?
Okay, I'd like to respond to that.
Your Worship, Council is correct. Dominion Bond Rating Service did change the city's credit rating last year. However, if you read their report, you'll note that they have very few concerns with the city's financial position. They are very happy with our capital program, with the level of debt that we use, and with the amount of capital from revenue that Council is putting into the capital budget. Their concern was primarily regional debt, and the fact that regional debt impacts on our taxpayers. So that's where they see the risk. That's what they wrote in their report. And in fact, when I read their report, I couldn't believe that they had downgraded us when they talked about reclassified. Fair enough. I think that was actually my word at one point.
It was.
Anyway, so there isn't a general unhappiness out there with the amount of debt and capital from revenue we're using, or let's just be more broad, the funding sources that we have for our capital program. So the capital from revenue component had been low compared to prior capital plans. So when this plan was done, the current plan was done, Council agreed that we should begin moving capital from revenue back up to a little higher balance with the venture debt. So that's one of the reasons why capital from revenue has increased in this capital plan over the last one. So
That's your 5.
I'll return.
I have a question. I know that Councillor Sullivan has been desperately sick thinking about the Dominion bond rating. Ms. Lowe, I understand we had a bond offering, is that correct?
Yeah, we issued $100 million bond yesterday morning.
How long did it take to go?
For the first 25 minutes, we sold 92 million, and the rest of the 8 million were sold within the next hour and a half. And it's very interesting to note that before we issued the $100 million bonds, we got confirmation from Standard & Poor, which is one of the 2 biggest credit rating company, and they reaffirmed our AAA credit rating. And they also gave us a very detailed report in January saying that they are very pleased with the fiscal responsibility of the City of Vancouver, and that they don't have any problem with the level of debt that the City of Vancouver has.
So it would appear that people are not running away from buying bonds for Vancouver.
No, they love our bonds.
And the last question I have is, how many did you buy, Councillor Sullivan? Councillor Lewis?
There we go. Well, on a slightly drier, I hope a more productive note, I have a very long-winded motion, if I may. Your Worship, may I move a motion? Yes, thank you. I would move A.
That's it?
No, I'm waiting for you to get your page. I'm going to wait for you to get your page because it gets a little bit complicated. I'll move A, a modified version of B2. Third word, replace consider with approve. Second line, right after the close bracket, add the words and the addition of 1 million and the addition of 1 million to the contingency reserve fund. Third line, where it currently reads 2.68%, replace that with 2.93%. The very last line, where it currently reads 2.2%, replace that with 2.45%. I will move C as presented, as with D, E, F, G, and I. And if I might speak briefly to that long-winded motion.
Yes, go ahead.
First of all, I don't think it would be appropriate for us to get into a debate without firstly acknowledging the absolutely outstanding work that staff have done in recalibrating what would have been a totally unacceptable tax increase of over 5%. But more importantly, doing that without impacting frontline services. And even more importantly, doing it with the ability to fund additional services. This is a triple win budget. Number one, the tax increase is very, very reasonable. They've ratcheted the number down from above 5% into the 2% range. Number two, they've done that without any cuts to frontline services. And then icing on the cake, they've opened up enough room in the budget for us, as the year progresses and proceeds, to approve, if we wish, a whole spectrum of initiatives. And that leads me to the only minor adjustment I've made to the recommendation, B2. Currently, B2, as worded without the changes that I proposed, would have created a contingency reserve fund of $4 million. As Councillor Cadman very astutely pointed out, 1 day of snow on 1 month, just 2 months ago, already depleted about $500,000 from that fund, bringing it from $4 million to approximately $3.5 million. Even if there was not another snowflake the rest of the year, should Council approve all of the yet unfunded initiatives that total in 04 $3.8 million, there would be nothing left in contingency. And as a very fiscally conservative person, I want some money left in contingency for unforeseen events. Unforeseen beyond the items that we might approve, unforeseen beyond snow. And that's why I think a $5 million contingency reserve fund is a much more prudent approach to take to the budget than a $4 million contingency reserve. Now, what is the impact of that $1 million increase in our total budget on the homeowner, on the taxpayer, on our employer? As you heard earlier today, less than a penny a day. In conclusion, this is a triple win budget. And what I look forward to, hopefully, and this is still left up to Council, but what I look forward to, hopefully, over the next coming weeks and months, is a whole number of initiatives that we now do have enough room in the budget for. The Food Policy Council, libraries open on Sundays, the Carnegie Center. Appendix 2 lists dozens of positive initiatives that will make the city a better city at a very reasonable tax increase, below that of almost every other municipality in the region, significantly lower than last year. And I'm going to do something very dangerous. I'm going to make a prediction. I'm going to predict that with the Cope majority, what you've seen this year, a tax increase lower than last year, you will see yet again next year. We're not doing what was done in the past, taxes going up every year. We're doing what Cope is proud of, taxes that are very, very reasonable and responsible. Thank you, Your Worship.
Councillor Sullivan.
Well, I found that to be highly flawed presentation. First of all, I'm just going to pick one out of the air. A 1 day of snow does not cost $500,000. It costs $50,000 to maintain 1 day of snow. So that's just where I can start. But I'm going to.
We need a staff clarification on that because it was
$500,000 to clear snow for 1 day.
a big snow.
No, just to provide clarity around that issue, the snowfall that we had resulted in work for about 3, 4, 5 days. And so it was over that extended period of time for that snow and ice conditions during and following the storm. generated the expenditure of the 468. So it isn't just one day, it is one storm extended over several days of activity.
Can I get clarification? This one day of snow cost us about $50,000.
Typically, a shift is 50,000. If we have to run into the evening and late night, then that adds up and accumulates. But again, typically a snowstorm doesn't last a single day. It usually extends over several days in terms of plowing and icing control.
Thank you. First of all, losing the AAA credit rating, I do recognize that we are still very financially healthy, that we are the inheritors of a number of councils that did create a situation where we have a AAA credit rating, the only city in Canada to have achieved that. We did lose our AAA credit rating from the Dominion Bond Rating Service, and I think it's a great wake-up call. The memo, and I appreciate the staff's efforts to mitigate the effects on your psyche, but the reality is that there were two main points for the credit rating. One is the past performance, and the other is the assumed future performance. What are the risks in the future? And they did downgrade us to a AA, and I think that really does give us a wake-up call. We've got to get our spending under control. I was quite astounded to hear Councillor Louis refer to a 6.02% tax increase as a moderate rate of increase. That is certainly not something that I would call moderate. The big disappointment for me is that we are not including what we know will be revenue. We can be very, very certain, more as certain as any of our other revenues, that we will be receiving at minimum $4 million. We could, but I think the mayor's comments that I didn't vote for it, therefore I don't get to spend it. Now, if only the people who voted for it and the political organization that voted for it gets to spend that money. This is kind of what you call Enron-esque kind of accounting in which we keep certain money off the books. I think this is the forum all of council in public should decide the priorities of this budget, and that includes the monies that will come from slots. I would like to, I know futilely, but in an effort to help this council keep its election promise, to move an amendment to that rate in D2 to 1.1% rate of inflation, which would account for the 2.1% minus the $4 million we know we're going to get from slots. So I would propose that as an amendment.
Is there a seconder? Brilliant. I'll speak to that to start with. First of all, I think that, well, you've had your 5 minutes, believe me. I think first of all, we need to take this in order. Last year, we were at 4 and change when you wanted to kick it up 1% for the business, which would have put us up over 7.5. In fact, you stayed with the 0.5, which we were thankful for. In the end, it didn't do the business community much good. It, in fact, pushed them up farther, so they're not asking for it this year. Secondly, as usual, you're spending money that we don't have. It's fine for you to say, oh, the slots are going to be there in September, the slots are going to be there in August, as you said. We don't know that. We don't know that at all. And so for you to be spending money that we don't have, well, not typical of MPA, is certainly typical of you. I think that it would be fair to say that right now, with this budget as set forward, and I don't think we're finished with the figure yet, I think it would be fair to say that we have met all of our objectives. And I will be the first to admit that I may have not quite realized how difficult it is to reach the rate of inflation. I was simply trying to reverse the trend that the NDP or MPA had for all of those years, where they never made or even came close to it. I now recognize that it is a very difficult thing to do. And so the idea that we would go with a 1.1% increase, utilizing money that we don't have and have actually no idea how much we're going to get, you're suggesting we would, for instance, get 4 million in 4 months. I think you're dreaming again in MPA Technicolor. And so I will be voting against this amendment. Councillor Ladner.
Could I just get clarification of the wording of the motion?
This would be the one you seconded?
I seconded the amendment.
The amendment?
All the rest of it.
That's what I was asking, the amendment or the motion? We're on the amendment right now.
Yes, the amendment.
You need the wording for the amendment
Yes.
that you seconded.
Yes.
You seconded an amendment without knowing the wording.
I'd like to clarify the wording, if I may.
Could I ask Councillor Sullivan to please repeat that?
You've got it written down, I take it, eh? No?
Well, I can tell you what Councillor Sullivan moved was a 1.1 rate, and which he referred to as the 2.1% less 4 million. Now, I assume staff could translate that into comparable numbers for here.
Well, so we're just discussing the amendment, then I'll have something to say about the other.
Thank you.
Can I ask for clarification? The 1.1 only pertains to the city portion. So what about the outside agents, which is the 0.48? Are you going to add that onto the 1.1?
You're doing so well, go ahead. Okay, hold on.
If you look at B2, you were talking about the
No,
city
I
share of
understand,
2.2.
and I have made a mistake on that. I want to add the 0.48% on top of the 1.1.
So basically for rounding purpose, 1.6.
Yeah, and just to clarify that in all other budgets that I've been through, that is where most of the rates that go beyond the rate of inflation, it usually comes from the outside agencies. I only remember one time when we added some to the police beyond the rate of inflation, but in my time, almost every budget has been at the rate of inflation plus the added cost from external agencies.
Councillor Ladner, I have to ask, would you like to second the corrected amendment? Okay, thank you. So it's 1.58.
1.58.
Okay. Councillor Lewis.
I'll pass on the amendment. I'm voting against the amendment.
Councillor Cadman.
Well, I'm going to speak against the amendment too. I find it quite interesting that we have yet to have a final decision on the location of the slot machines down at the place where you work, where you had to exclude yourself from conflict of interest, but you want to spend the money before we had the final meeting. I don't get it. I mean, you can't spend money you don't have. That's what your financial people are telling you, and you want to ignore that. I can't support this amendment.
Seeing no further questions, call the vote. All those in favor of the amendment? Opposed? It goes down with Ladner and Sullivan in favor. Back to the original motion, Councillor Ladner.
Your Worship, if I may ask the staff to give us the best estimate, as conservative as you like to be, on the expected revenue from gambling proceeds at the Plaza of Nations. We do actually know where it is. It's at the Plaza of Nations. We haven't approved. I thought we had approved. I was at a meeting where we approved it.
We haven't approved the zoning.
Okay.
We've been liaising with the social planning department, and we're given very, I would say, cursory figures, and I would say that we do not know right now what that conservative figure would be. I think the $4 million was under the assumption that they would open in May, and we know that that's not going to be happening given some of the issues that have been happening in the area.
Okay. So now we're on Councillor Lewis's
Yes, motion.
The part I didn't get in here, in my notes here, was the part about the $1 million. Could you read the motion there with all those changes included?
That council approved the budget adjustments put forward by the corporate management team, itemized on page 12 of the report, and the addition of $1 million to contingency reserve to reduce the general purposes tax increase to 2.93%, reducing the city share of the anticipated tax increase to approximately 2.45%. Is that correct?
And now a question to staff. If we add on the items from the Appendix 2, what will be the final increase? Councillor Lewis indicated that he's a strong supporter of those. So that's another, was it 700,000?
Those are included in the $3.8 million. I guess I'm not exactly understanding your question.
Well, we're approving something here today that, and then in item F, we're being asked to approve additional items.
That's right, and this funding would come from contingency reserves. So the only increase would be, if the motion stays, would be an increase of $1 million to contingency. All of the rest of the initiatives would be funded as a draw from there. So $5 million of contingency.
And in order to fund the contingency, we put the, okay, I understand. Well, I have to say that Councillor Lewis has this, I think, distracting habit of saying, well, it's only a few cents, it's only a few dollars, it's only a little bit of this, it's only a little bit of that. But when you're on the tax-paying end of these only a little bit of this and that increases, they mount up. And people are being asked to only pay a little more for water, only pay a little more for this, only pay a little more for transit. And I think we have to be a little more sensitive to people's willingness and ability to pay this money, especially when we notice from the surveys that the people at the lower end of the property owning spectrum are the ones who are most resistant to tax increases. So I'm not going to support his increase to 2.93%. And I have an amendment I'd like to make to item G. And I presume it's appropriate to talk about that at this point.
Yes.
And my amendment would be at the end of the instruction that council instructs staff to report back on the revenue expectations and the policies for utilizing additional gaming revenue. And I notice we're quite confident that revenue is going to come in when it comes to this motion. And the recently announced federal GST rebate. Add to that, and that the first priority for the allocation of those revenues is to lower taxes rather than finance new programs. Now, I know the mayor has said, as though he has the power to just dictate this kind of thing, that this will all go to new programs. But I think there's going to be a great temptation here to start launching into a whole series of new programs and fail to recognize that we have a lot of programs that we already have underway that are underfunded or in need of more funding. The police have already been here and backed off of requests that they had. We heard from the community forums that the police would like to have, that there's a lot of public support for increased funding for the police. And my deep suspicion is that this council would love to get off and fund some of its hobby horses on the eve of election with a lot of new money. And I think we should stay with the budgeted items that we already have, that we're struggling to finance already. And if we have extra money, if indeed it does come in, and we're all of course doubting whether it will ever come in, that we dedicate it to lowering taxes rather than to raising new programs and adding to the load that the taxpayers will have to support in future years. So I'm going to vote, but I just like to leave the amendment at that. Thank you.
I'd like to speak to this first. I always suspected that Councillor Ladner was sleeping all the way through the debate on slots. In fact, much of that debate was taken up with a discussion of where that money would go. And if you go to all of these surrounding municipalities, and one of the complaints and one of the reasons why I voted for it was because the surrounding municipalities can do one-time thing for their citizens to help them in many ways, culturally, with regards to downloading from the provincial government, women's centers, and this type of thing. I don't see them as any new programs. And I don't think that at any time we should become hamstrung by by using gambling revenues as a way of paying taxes. Because it could go south, we could find it dropping as the slots come in around us, and so I don't believe it's stable funding. I believe that at the end of it, I certainly think that we have to answer for it, and council will. We have a wide variety of people who come before us with things that are important to our community, but we cannot fund because we do not have the money. One of the items, for instance, is we have an issue with civic events. That may be something that we may want to look at. And so I don't think that we should be designating this money to go towards that. Certainly the funding that's coming from the federal government as the GST, we know will be used for infrastructure of whatever sort it is. And the federal government takes a very dim view, and I can tell you that the Prime Minister takes a very dim view on us using that money to simply lower taxes rather than go to some form of infrastructure. And so if we start using this money that's flowing to the municipalities from the federal government as a way of lowering taxes, I can guarantee you both the province and the federal government will cut the New Deal very quickly. I don't see where everybody is so upset about this money. It's going to be coming to us. You say we know it's coming. I believe we know it's coming too. But you want a definitive answer on how much it is. And we don't know, and we won't know from one year to the next how solid it is. And so I'm voting against this. It's, as far as I'm concerned, it's as bad as the amendment that Councillor Sullivan brought. We're simply trying to spend a little bit of time here so that you can look good on TV. Councillor Lewis.
Well, Your Worship, I will also be voting against the amendment, and not just because it's a bad idea, but because it is literally an impossible idea. Think it through for just a moment. Today, or within the next few days, we're going to be approving a budget, and shortly thereafter, out will go all the tax bills in the mail. They'll be delivered to people's mailboxes. People will pay what's on the bill. They'll write a check, and the check will be sent to City Hall in the mail. Taxes will be paid. Many months later, at some point down the road, mid-year will come into the city money from a source that we've not budgeted for. Councillor Ladner would have us use that money to reduce the taxes that have already been paid, the taxes that have already been itemized on the tax bill that went out in the mail and got delivered into people's mailboxes many months earlier. The reason that we don't budget in our budget for revenue that we don't yet know about is because it's not prudent. And the reason that once that money comes in, you cannot use it at that point in time to reduce taxes in that year is because the taxes for that year will have already been set. They'll have already been billed. They'll have already been paid. So I'm sorry, Your Worship, with the greatest of respect to somebody who normally has thoughtful ideas that are of benefit to council, this idea is not just a bad idea, it's an impossible idea.
Councillor Louis.
Thank you, Your Worship. Normally what happens in council is that both Councillor Ladner and Sullivan are directed by the staff report that comes before us, because usually staff have spent a lot of time, well, not usually, but they have spent a lot of time in coming to a conclusion and making recommendations for our benefit. In this case here, Councillor Sullivan and Councillor Ladner aren't taking staff's advice, so perhaps we should hear from staff one last time to provide some clarity, because it seems that despite what staff is saying about allocating unknown funds, at this point in time, our GST amount and our gaming revenue, potential gaming revenue, is an unknown amount. And staff have told us that it's not prudent to add this to our budget. And I looked at staff, perhaps they could tell Councillor Ladner and Sullivan one last time, because that's generally where you would favor And I'm not understanding why you would not. So staff, is it your opinion that it's inappropriate to allocate monies into our budget that we do not know of at this point in time?
If the money that we actually get is lower than the money that we put into the budget, then that means that I would have a budget shortfall. If I reduce the tax levy by $4 million for the gaming revenue, so the tax bill that is sent to the taxpayer would be in total $4 million less. However, is in reality, I only get $3 million as revenue, then I would have a shortfall of $1 million. That's why to be fiscally prudent, Director of Finance never budgets for revenue that we don't know for certain. Case in point, the $4 million is based on the assumption that the casino would open in May, and it's not happening. So I don't really know at this point in time when the additional revenue is coming in. I can put in one month, but then I'll be pretty nervous if it doesn't happen.
So
according to the Vancouver Charter, we have to balance the budget, and I have to make sure that we don't run into deficit at the end of the year.
And as Director of Finance, what would you say would be the effect on our credit rating if we were to take this creative type of accounting, this Enron type of accounting into practice?
I wouldn't go that far as to Enron accounting, because I would have my external auditors looking at the books. Well, the last resort, and if there's a budget shortfall, then we have to go into reserve.
So it would be negative. If we were to take the approach that's being suggested by both Councillor Ladd and Councillor Sullivan, it would be negative on our credit rating.
One alternative is to wait till next year to put through this motion when we know for sure what is the exact gaming revenue that we are going to get.
So when we know for sure how much money, that would be the appropriate time to include it within our budget.
Then it's up to council to direct staff how much to include and what it will be used for.
Now, to the motion that's been moved by Councillor Lewis, what's staff's opinion of adding the $1 million to contingency?
We're on the amendment.
Well, would you like me to?
No, only on the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stevenson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Speaking to the amendment, I find it somewhat ironic that the people who are speaking out the most about where this money from slot should be spent are the very people who voted against it, who said no to charities, no to any extra money coming into council, and now are the first to stand up and say, this is where the money should go. It was a really difficult decision for many of us to vote in favor of slots. And in fact, the reason that we did so, as you've already pointed out, was so that there might be a little money that we could put into addictive services, not only say for those who are addicted to gambling, but alcohol, drugs, to put money into women's shelters, to put money into other areas in the community that would be of help. So to turn around now, I think, and try to limit where this money is going and direct it into one particular area, lowering the taxes, when we're doing our best to keep those taxes as low as possible and still have services, and find that this is where we might have a little extra money to spend on those services, I think is to make mischief at this particular point. So I'll be voting in opposition to this amendment.
Thank you. Councillor Sullivan?
Well, I think we're arguing two different amendments here. I thought Councillor Ladner's amendment was to set up the principle that it could be used not to create new programs.
No, that's not what the amendment was. The amendment was at the first priority. So that's different than first
So it
priority.
allows the principle that we could reduce.
It doesn't allow it. It says the first priority. It's not an and/or.
Okay, but it doesn't say that we have to take so much money this year. It says that the first priority And now, as much as I dislike dividing the loot of slot machine money, which we know is going to cause a lot of social harm, we've heard from...
Stay on the amendment, please. You're not, no, it's not on the, no, it's not. We're not here to argue about slots.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, I just spent a number of minutes just listening to that discussion. So I will, first of all, I wanted to clarify some information that I've heard here. And apparently, the slot money is not for sure, because apparently the zoning has not come through. So is there a chance that we can now vote against slots? Is there some in the form of developments coming forward that we can actually vote against it? Is this the case?
That's not on the amendment. Councillor Ladner, I'm ruling you out of order. Councillor Ladner. Councillor Ladner.
You deal with a point of order?
That's fine. I'm ruling him out of order because he's not speaking to the amendment. Fill your boots. We'll go first of all with the council a vote whether we should go for. Thank you. All those in favor? Opposed? That takes care of that. Councillor Ladner. Councillor Ladner and Councillor Sullivan were voted in the positive on the last motion.
We voted against the last motion. Your Worship, I'd like to just clarify too what I'm trying to do here. I am not suggesting, A, that we reduce taxes this year. I didn't say anything about this year. Newsflash to Councillor Lewis, there will be taxes next year too, and we could easily apply this to next year. So I'm not suggesting you take back all the mailings, but I thank you for your concern about that. And the second thing is that if we have to, by some federal edict, use this money for infrastructure, I'm only saying that the first priority is to lower taxes. I'm not ruling out uses for other purposes. And the reason that one of the reasons I voted against the slot machines was this very point that we're discussing here today, that we are going to be creating a slush fund for the pet projects of this council on the backs of chronic gamblers. And I don't think there's anything inconsistent about following through that thought today. I also am hearing my worst fears confirmed that at the slightest sight of some new money, this council is quite happy to jump in and start picking up downloading costs, taking on all kinds of responsibilities that were traditionally never part of the city's responsibility, and effectively taking the heat off the senior levels of government who may have abandoned those programs, which I don't think is what we should be doing. So all I'm asking here is that somebody said, well, we should defer to staff because staff has good wisdom on these things. We are asking staff to come back with a policy and say where this money should go. I don't think that's a staff decision. I think that's a political decision. That's why I'm bringing it up here, and that's why I'd like to air this debate here, and that's why I think we should establish that this money should not be spent on a whole lot of new programs that will saddle the taxpayers of Vancouver with additional expenses and lead us down the path of a municipal ministry of social services that we cannot afford. So that's my concern.
Thank you. Councillor Sullivan?
Mr. Mayor, every time I do get shut down, either my mic is turned off or a call...
Are you speaking to this amendment or not?
I'm going to speak to you, Mr. Mayor, about your treatment...
You're out of order. Councillor Louis?
Perhaps Councillor Sullivan, after over a year, isn't understanding of what the staff recommendation is, that staff report back on the revenue expectations and the policies for utilizing additional gaming revenues in a recently announced federal GST rebate. And what that says to me is that staff will do due diligence and provide us with options, not where council presupposes the outcome, where I would never presuppose to have the expertise and all the city's needs, but rather at a much higher level, after staff have done due diligence, that they would come to us with the options available to us in order to direct these funds most appropriately for the betterment of all our citizens. So what Councillor Ladner is saying is that he's got the wisdom. He has the wisdom now that this is the best way to do it. And I find that insulting to staff that they won't be able to come back to us and give us the options that are necessary to implement a program for the betterment of everyone. So perhaps another year will help Councillor Ladner understand that staff will be doing work, they will be coming back to us with options, and ultimately, council will be making that decision, not staff.
Councillor Lewis.
Call question.
Thank you. Question's been called. All those in favor?
Mayor, I would like to make a point of order.
Sorry, question's been called.
Mr. Mayor.
Sorry. All those in favor? Opposed? On the amendment. We are voting on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment? All those opposed? The amendment goes down. Now we're back to the original motion. Councillor Louie.
On the original motion to staff, on the additional $1 million to contingency reserve, could you elaborate on the necessity of that additional $1 million?
First of all, it's council's prerogative to decide whether to add 1 million to the contingency or not. The reason why we retain the contingency at 4 million, despite all these initiatives that's at the table, is that, as Ms. Klein said, we don't believe that all the initiatives that were in this interim budget report would be brought forward to council. I have one case of a clerical position that is one of the new initiatives, but then the general manager decides to hold it off because we are working on a shared service review. So this is one example as to one new initiative would not be brought forward. So there's room in the contingency. And then we are also concerned, we also believe that council would look at the needs of the initiatives before council approve it. So based on historical practice, we firmly believe 4 million is sufficient. But if council wants to add another million in, that means a 0.25% increase this year. But if all the worst case scenario is if all the initiatives that is put forward plus the initiatives that use up this additional 1 million would be spent, the impact on 2005, which Ms. Klein mentioned, is which is 1.8 plus the other 0.5, it would be 2% tax increase in 2005.
Okay. So, as I understand it, the process that we currently have, we have a number of initiatives that are identified, not approved, but identified, and those total $3.8 million.
Yes.
Our contingency that you've proposed is $4 million, leaving some room of unallocated or unidentified amounts of money at $200,000.
Right.
But in addition to that, a number of the programs may not be approved, therefore making that $200,000 larger by X amount,
right,
depending on programs that are not approved.
Right.
In 2003, we had a $4.5 million contingency reserve, but we had $6.9 million worth of identified programs, not approved, but identified at this very same time.
Right.
But in the end, we spent 1.7 million.
Right.
So therefore, last year, we did not use up all of our contingency reserve. We had an abundance of identified programs, but ultimately we pared it down so that it fit within the cap of the contingency, but in fact, quite sufficiently because we only spent 1.7.
Yes.
In 2002, again, we had $4 million worth of contingency, and we only had $3.5 million worth of identified programs that we potentially could have spent money on.
Mm-hmm. And
again, we underspent our contingency reserve, right, by a significant amount.
Right.
Now, in this case, we only have a cap, but of 200. We only have some room of $200,000. And your opinion is that it's sufficient because the expectation that everything will be passed usually doesn't come come about.
And there's another hidden pocket which we've been talking about, the gaming revenue, and staff would come back on the policy of using the revenue, and then at the latter part of the year, hopefully we would know for certainty what is the additional gaming revenue we would have that is not factored into this budget, and council can always use that gaming revenue for any new initiatives that you have, but then that we do not have room for in the contingency reserve. That would be the last option that council could have.
Okay. Could I?
Councillor Sullivan.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I won't take any more of your time. I am just announcing that I will leave this chamber. I find that this is an abuse of democracy. 26 times my mic has been shut off.
27. Councillor Bass.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Due to the miracle of having a good database, I'm sorry Councillor Sullivan's missing this because the record of NPA achievement. In 1997, the budget increase was 4.5%. In 1998, 2.0%. In 1999, 3.4%. In the year 2000, 2.7%. In 01, 2.75%. In 02, 4.0%. So over the last 6 years of the NPA, their average increase over those years was 3.23%. What Councilor Lewis is proposing is less than 3%.
We're speaking to the motion here.
I'm speaking motion, and I'm supporting Councilor Lewis's motion because it actually achieves a lower increase in budget than the last 6 NPA budgets under Councilor George Pruill, who is very careful about spending money. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wordsworth.
I'll be speaking in favor of the motion. It seems to me that in putting $1 million in contingency, we're just being prudent. If there's another snow fight, which is very possible, if there's increased policing costs, say for the Canucks game, which we hope they will win, if there's increasing city costs, which possibly would come from dawn loading, such as the closure of youth centers for Aboriginal youth, such as the closure of women's centers, such as more homelessness, such as more panhandling. I could go on and on about some of the crises the city is facing that we're trying to address because we care about the citizens. We need to ensure that we can cover those costs, and I think that we're being fiscally prudent. We're keeping the taxes as low as possible, certainly way lower than for other municipalities, and we're trying to make sure we can cover all the costs that might be ahead of us and not go over budget.
Well, just a very brief clarification question, if I may, to staff. I want to make sure I've understood correctly. The snow that we have already paid for, the snow that occurred in January, that amount, $400 and some odd thousand, that will come out of contingency reserve, is that correct?
It will come out of contingency reserve.
All right, so then just very briefly, and debate, Your Worship, and in response to some very good and thoughtful points put forward by Councillor Louis, in fact, there isn't $200,000 left over. If all of the $3.8 million were to be approved by council, there is only $3.5 million left in contingency. So there wouldn't be a $200,000 leftover, would be a $300,000 shortfall. So just in response to the points that Councilor put forward, I think those are good points, but I think from a prudence perspective, given the fact that there's not $4 million left there, but $3.5 million, that it may be appropriate to put that extra $1 million there.
Thank you. Councillor Louis.
To staff, when there's unspent monies within contingency reserve, what happens to it?
Goes to the bottom line as either a surplus or a deficit for the city for that year.
And if there is in fact a surplus for the city that year, what happens to that money?
We'll put it in a reserve for future budget.
And how much is in that reserve for future budget?
$8 million.
There's $8 million currently in an account that's earmarked for future budget.
Yeah, for a very unexpected event that caused the budget to be overspent, then we would have to take the money from this reserve to balance the financial position at year end.
And has that fund ever been accessed?
Not yet, luckily. We've been managing the budget
I
very
see
closely.
two separate answers. Sorry.
And then not to contradict, certainly in the past, we have used revenue surplus for, it's the reserve. We have used revenue surpluses to deal with the year-end issues and to deal with issues that come up during the year. It is council's ultimate contingency, if you like.
And what is the...
But certainly it hasn't been used in recent years.
Okay.
Definitely not the past 2 years.
Okay. Now, what is the... Sorry. What is the plan for, in terms of that reserve? What is the ceiling? What is what is the basement of that reserve, so that we maintain a certain amount, and in order to have the contingency of contingencies, I guess?
We find 8 million is very low when we are talking about a $700 million budget. But then, touch wood, we have been really monitoring the budget very closely, at least in the past 2 years, to such an extent we don't need to draw on it. And the money that we get into that that reserve is getting lower and lower. This year we could only be putting in about 200,000, but it still needs to be confirmed by our external auditor. So the whole idea of this reserve is to keep it, not to use it unnecessarily unless there's a very major unforeseen event that resulted in our budget being overspent.
What is the plan in terms of raising that? If you're saying that 8 million is low, then is there a plan that we have to increase that amount?
No, just wish that all the department would come in with a surplus.
Further to the amount that you said in terms of contribution from year 2003, that needs to be confirmed by our auditors. The information that I received was that in 2003, we had a $4.5 million contingency reserve, and we spent 1.7. So
right.
What
but then there are
to...
some departments that were overspent that ate up some of the reserve.
So it's council initiatives that spent 1.7, but departments ate up the remaining amount.
Yeah, there were certain departments that were overspent, such that that surplus in the contingency reserve is used to offset the overspend of that department.
Okay, so despite the fact that you believe that 8 million is low, you still believe it's sufficient so that we don't have to increase our operating contingency reserve by $1 million.
Yeah, you don't increase the budget and raise taxes just to beef up that reserve.
No, not the reserve, but rather contingency reserve.
Oh.
You're still of the opinion that the operating budget's contingency reserve is sufficient without the additional $1 million, because it is in fact backstopped by this additional $8 million if there are unforeseen circumstances. Is that correct?
Yeah, and also as I said, if the 4 million is not sufficient, and once staff came back with their policy on the gaming revenue, and also once we know the certainty of the money, that money could be used for certain initiatives.
Thank you. Your Worship, I'd like to move an amendment to the motion to reflect the language articulated in the original staff motion. No, the motion as it was moved, the language in the staff recommendation was not moved. I'm making an amendment to the motion to reflect the exact language as articulated in the staff report under B2.
B2.
Is exactly the recommendation, staff recommendation, all the way through
including without H. Sorry, the H is withdrawn, right? So it'd be A, B2, C, D, E, F, G, and I.
Speaking to that amendment.
I'm moving this amendment because after hearing, although I hear very clearly from Councillor Lewis that it is prudent, I'm satisfied that there are enough contingencies in place where we can keep the tax rate increase at 2.68, and that it would in fact be prudent to give our taxpayers as much benefit as possible, that we're not overcharging them if in fact it's the opinion of staff that there is sufficient money to run our city. So even though it's less than a penny a day at $3.60, it's still $3.60. So rather than us taking it for a possible rainy day, because if we don't spend it, if we tax them and we don't spend it, it goes into this reserve of reserve.